In most of my videos, I analyse legendary works of fiction to understand what makes them so good, but this video is going to be a little bit different. LitHub recently republished a review from 1954 of Tolkien's Fellowship of the Rings by poet WH Auden. It's a great article where Auden does my job for me. So in this video, we're going to go through the review to understand Auden's take on what makes Lord of the Rings so great. You can find the link to the full LitHub article in the description below, and while you're down there, hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. So for those who don't know, The Lord of the Rings was originally written in a single volume, but due to shortages of paper in Britain post-World War II, the publisher decided it should be split into a trilogy. Auden's review was published in the New York Times in 1954, right as the Fellowship hit bookshelves. Here are some of the key comments he made and my thoughts on them. 17 years ago, there appeared without any fanfare a book called The Hobbit, which, in my opinion, is one of the best children's stories of the century. In The Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first volume of a trilogy, J.R.R. Tolkien continues the imaginative history of his imaginary world to which he introduced us in his earlier book, but in a manner suited to adults. For anyone who likes the genre to which it belongs, the heroic quest, I cannot imagine a more wonderful Christmas present. What I find really interesting here is that Auden places the book in a genre he calls heroic quest. We think of Tolkien as the father of modern fantasy, which he is, but fantasy in many ways is more of a setting than a genre in the traditional sense. Heroic quest, regardless of setting, is probably a better description of the type of story and sits well with other traditional genre descriptions like crime or romance. What this reinforces for me is something a literary agent recently told me. Genre is a marketing tool. Bookshops have different shelves to help readers find what they want, and genres are just the labels placed on those shelves. Editors specialize in publishing content for particular shelves. Literary agents have to pitch books to those editors, so they specialize along the same lines. Us writers then have to pigeonhole our work to also fit those shelves, so we can find a literary agent who has contacts with the right editors. But, as Tolkien shows, that doesn't have to hold us back. He took the heroic quest format, but rather than setting it in its traditional historical or mythological setting, he combined it with a completely original fantasy setting, the like of which had never been seen before. As Auden points out, Tolkien's innovating didn't stop there. All quests are concerned with some numinous object, the waters of life, the grail, buried treasure, etc. Normally, this is a good object, which it is the hero's task to find or rescue from the enemy. But the ring of Mr. Tolkien's story was made by the enemy, and is so dangerous even the good cannot use it without becoming corrupted. What Auden is pointing out here is that genres form tropes, and what he's praising Tolkien for is toying with these tropes. This is the good kind of subverting expectations, bringing a fresh angle to a story, but in a way which feels authentic to the plot and the world being described. Auden continues with an overview of Middle-earth as a setting, which I won't go into here as we're probably all familiar with that, but it creates a great segue into his next observation. Of any imaginary world, the reader demands that it seem real, and the standard of realism demanded today is much stricter than in the time, say, of Malory. Mr. Tolkien is fortunate for possessing an amazing gift for naming and a wonderfully exact eye for description. By the time one has finished his book, one knows the histories of hobbits, elves, dwarves, and the landscape they inhabit, as well as one knows one's own childhood. The Malory Auden is referring to is no doubt Sir Thomas Malory, who wrote Le Morte d'Arthur. This favourable comparison of Tolkien's world building to a book about ancient England again shows that Auden doesn't really think a fancy setting changes the demands of a heroic quest, and he builds on that point brilliantly in his final paragraph. Lastly, if one is to take a tale of this kind seriously, However superficially unlike the world we live in its characters and events may be, it nevertheless holds up a mirror to the only nature we know, our own. In this too, Mr. Tolkien has succeeded superbly, and what happened in the year of the Shire 1418 in the Third Age of Middle-earth is not only fascinating in AD 1954, but also a warning and an inspiration. No fiction I've read in the last 5 years has given me more joy than The Fellowship of the Ring. This is a super interesting quote for me because of the never-ending debate about whether there are themes applicable to the real world in Tolkien's writing. This debate primarily stems from Tolkien once writing that he disliked allegory. But people who quote that line to prove Tolkien wasn't a thematic writer simply haven't read the whole quote. I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations, and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other in the purpose domination of the author. Great thematic writing is all about the kind of applicability Tolkien is describing. It's a discussion, not a message, and it's this type of thematic discussion, this applicability, which Auden is praising. The Red Book YouTube channel did a great video on Tolkien's themes, which I'll also link in the description below. I really enjoyed reading this article, and it must have been a great boost for Tolkien to get such a great write-up in the New York Times from a fellow writer. As a writer, my key takeaways are: Number 1, genre is a marketing tool. It shouldn't stop you innovating. Number 2, great writers understand the tropes of genre, but can subvert them in satisfying ways. Number 3, as writers we should put effort into the details of our story, because they really can make them stand out. All of Tolkien's hard work in world building are clearly noticed and appreciated by Auden. For example, the years he spent creating languages, which Auden calls Tolkien's gift for naming things. And finally, number 4, any story can benefit from great thematic writing. As Auden described, a story should hold up a mirror to the real world, but that doesn't mean it should preach to the reader. As Tolkien put it, it's about applicability, not tyrannically imposing a message. The only thing I'm a little disappointed about with this article is that Auden didn't mention the Ring verse, the poem which serves as a prologue to the Fellowship of the Ring and the Lord of the Rings as a whole. It would have been great to get his perspective on this as a prominent poet himself, but if you want to hear my views on the Ring verse, you can find them here. Thank you for watching this video, and even more so if you hit like, subscribe or left a comment. This really does mean a lot to me.